Welcome back to the panel discussion, Pillars of Modernization in Government, sponsored by Insight Public Sector on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today are Dave Bennett, the Chief Information Officer at the Defense Information Systems Agency, Harrell Watkins, the Chief Operating Officer and the Director of the Office of Technology Operations and Planning at the Environmental Protection Agency, Bill Zielinski, the Director of Strategic Programs at the General Services Administration, Randall Conway, the Principal Director to the Deputy CIO for Information Enterprise at the Department of Defense, and Prince Anand, the Director of Federal for Insight Public Sector. Now, gentlemen, before break, we were talking a little bit about the changes in the infrastructure, the idea that mobility is playing such a big role. People want ubiquitous access. Bill, I know you're getting excited to kind of jump in there. At GSA and in your former roles, both at SSA, at OMB, you guys saw kind of both sides of the coin here. So talk a little bit about how your work at GSA is kind of making what Dave and Randall and everybody else kind of a reality.
So thanks, Jason. Absolutely. At GSA, we are uniquely positioned by mission to really be trying to take a look across the entire government to try to find what are the kinds of 80-20 solutions that we could bring to bear. So while we talked earlier about the uniqueness of mission at each agency, absolutely, and there are going to be parts of each agency's mission that you just can't simply buy from a box, right? So, but there are lots of what is going on at each agency where there are some centralized types of solutions, centralized schedules, purchasing vehicles that can be leveraged that would allow for us to really do this with a much greater speed and a much more cost-effective way. So this idea that if you take a look at some of these things, for example, the security requirements, as we take a look at any of these sorts of things that my colleagues have been talking about, we really try to work across the agencies, find out what they need in each of these different areas and say, how do we really bake these into a set of requirements? So instead of each agency having to pursue their own contractual vehicles, which can be a lengthy process, instead of each agency doing these things in terms of the security requirements in an inconsistent fashion, what are the sorts of things that we could do working with all the agencies to have all of those requirements baked into a contract? Harrell was talking about being able to drive down the cost. You want to have leverage? Think about the buying power of the entire federal government. We can take those things, be able to drive down those costs, have pre-competed vehicles where the problems and issues in and around protest and other things are lessened tremendously, and then be able to help agencies move out much more quickly in and around their modernization efforts that they have. And again, these are 80-20 solutions, realizing and understanding that we're not going to be able to do all things for every agency. But if we could really work together to figure out what are those things that can be placed into those contractual vehicles, we can help them move much more quickly, bring in new technologies much more readily, so that those challenges that they have in keeping up with the modernization as well as making their dollar go further, we can really help in that sort of way.
And I get the sense that for GSA, at least the Alliant contract, I know you guys are working on the Alliant 2 contract, is really that example of that type of contract that can change, that can morph, that can be, we'll use the word agile, if you will.
Absolutely, and in fact, we're doing some additional work with DISA right now as it relates to kind of cloud more broadly. And so while we have a lot of different parts and pieces of what is cloud out there that can be purchased through a variety of different vehicles, here we're really trying to figure out what is the right set of capabilities within a contractual vehicle that can help agencies kind of move out much more quickly on this. And you're right, things like the next Alliant 2 are ways in which we're trying to continue to evolve those requirements to make it a much more enriched buying experience for the agencies.
Dave, in many ways, DISA is playing a very similar role that GSA does for the civilian world. You guys do that for the DoD world. When Randall talks about the need for mobility and wireless, and Prince talks about the need for more bandwidth, 10, 15, 20 times faster, that all kind of falls back on DISA many times. Talk a little bit about how you're dealing with those network changes that need to meet the workforce's desires.
Yeah, so we provide the DISN across the department, so the NIPRNet and the SIPRNet. And so keeping that at an operational level that meets end user demands and expectations is pretty problematic, because it's sort of like the old storage scenario. You never have enough storage. Same thing here, you never have enough bandwidth, because as soon as you put more bandwidth out there, people find new and innovative ways. Some of them aren't innovative, just they basically decided they want to do something, and they bring it onto the network. And so we've tried to figure out how do we modernize the infrastructure, and in continually increase bandwidth as we go forward. One of the things we've noticed here a lot more in this past year than we have in before is really the staggering increase in folks using video and streaming videos, et cetera, across the network, whether that's like Yahoo or it's Facebook or it's things like that. The video piece of the puzzle is really getting to be one of those things that is sucking down lots of the bandwidth. And so how do we take that into account, put the infrastructure in place that enables us to support the requirement that's out there, and at the same time ensure we're not slowing down other users of the network? And so it's a constant trade-off between the different users, the different environments, the expectation, and then, more importantly, making sure from a security perspective you can see and understand what's going across the network to remain cyber vigilant, if you will.
And Prince, this kind of goes back to your point from earlier about the workforce is changing, and the workforce wants more video that this is seen, or they want access to different things. How does that fold into the thinking around modernization from your perspective?
Well, I think, as I mentioned earlier, we're kind of at an interesting inflection point here. I think I compare this to more like a Y2K type event, where you kind of have to not just upgrade your hardware for faster speeds, etc. You really have to look at your application, right? Because how that is being consumed, and the applications are becoming more video heavy content. And look at just how we even train today, right? The new boots on the street, new soldier. I mean, some of those training programs are based on literally video games. So if you're going to set up that type of training environment, it's going to require a lot more of everything, right? So that in terms of that, I think everything has to be taken into consideration. And then, not to mention, we've been heavily relying on the legacy applications, right? Pretty soon, as most of the manufacturers and publishers and support for the previous operating systems, those things are going to stop working. Dave alluded to it earlier about interoperability. So I think most applications are going to fall into that category because the new infrastructure upon which these new operating systems are built are really built more with virtualization in mind, with cloud in mind, and now you can build applications on top of them where you didn't have that option before. So all that is going to change how we think about modernization.
Harrell, let me turn to you because you brought up cloud first, so you get the short straw in the first part of this cloud discussion, I guess. There's hybrid, there's public, there's private, there's multiple different instances. But I think I think Prince's point is really clear, specifically about you can do things differently with cloud than you maybe couldn't do with the old client server setup or mainframe setup. How's that changing at EPA, the way you think about delivering those services going forward?
It's changed for us in a big way. One of the things that we're doing is obviously reducing the amount of planning and execution that we do around modernization around servers and buying more storage, and looking to leverage the cloud to provide a lot of those commodity type services. So that's a big area for us moving forward in the future. The other thing we talk about, Prince makes a good point about applications and how they're designed modular, more apt for virtualization and cloud services. That's another big push for us, is ensuring that we do anything that we design is not done in a monolithic fashion, but that we're also doing more modular design for new applications. Accompanied with that, it's also kind of a big transformation for the agency, particularly around how the infrastructure is managed. Typically, you go back 10, 15, 20 years ago, you have a staff that's trained in managing infrastructure, managing servers, managing storage, managing networks. Now, I'm transforming our staff into be more brokers of cloud services, brokers for how we demonstrate more value for what we provide to customer.
Bill, you're shaking your head again. You're hearing everything that Harrell's saying, like going, yes, yes, yes. Talk about that change, the agile and the broker and the change in the workforce.
So I think there's two things that are very important, and Prince touched on one of them. Is this idea that while we're looking at both the hardware and the software side, a move to cloud doesn't mean you simply take your legacy applications and you drop them on the cloud. You're simply going to buy yourself the same set of problems, but with an infrastructure that's a cloud-based infrastructure. And I think those are excellent points that our folks are making here, is that when we're making this sort of transition, you really do have to make sure you're not kind of single-threaded on kind of I'm going to get rid of my iron and move to a cloud infrastructure without looking at the application layer, the applications themselves. I think that's one aspect. But the second aspect from the GSA perspective here is this idea that it really it does change the consumption model as well. So this idea with cloud that you have this high level of virtualization means that more and more what we are going to see, or that we expect to see, is that you're not going to have agencies locking themselves into a particular product. They're really looking to say, from a capability standpoint, what are all of the different providers that might be out there? So not just virtualizing from the standpoint of the distribution across the infrastructure, but even kind of a virtualization, if you will, across providers, and that's really going to help from a business continuity standpoint, from the standpoint of being able to ensure kind of the ongoing operations, as well as keeping prices low because you're not burnt into any particular vendor that's out there.
Randall, a couple things that were brought up. I see in our reporting on DoD, you guys are making a big effort to move to the cloud. There's some new guidance that have come out, sort of new roadmaps. Talk a little bit about when you're hearing what EPA is doing, for instance, in terms of looking at the apps and looking at how you're delivering the services. How does this play into what DoD is trying to do?
Yeah, sure. I can definitely comment on that. We're looking at trying to outsource cloud services and do it on premise, do it on our military installations. We're trying to look at the best way to do that. We think there's some value there to engage with the industry, build some partnerships with industry, and sort of modernize sort of our data center infrastructure. But take it, one step at a time. We're not into let's just, jump in the deep end automatically. And so we want to have several little operations going to try to figure out what's the best way ahead for us. But one of the things that we have to keep in mind, and the gentleman here mentioned it, was there's a big transition cost to moving legacy applications to the cloud, and we see that all the time. And some of the applications that we've got in DoD are very old, very bulky, and almost impossible to move. And so therefore, we're not going to probably spend any time on those. But we think moving forward, we think there's some value in having a cloud capacity within the department. One thing I'd like to mention about how we deal with our mission partners, it's in theater. What Dave mentioned about one of the big demands on bandwidth today in theater is video. And it's really, that's how we're fighting the wars with UASs. Well, one of the other things that we're trying to do is how we interact with our mission partners. And so we have this project, our mission partner extension, we call it, mission partner extension to the information system, to the joint information environment. So we have the joint information environment concept we're trying to build out. We have this mission partner extension information system that we're trying to plug in place. What we're doing with that is we're creating a virtual data center concept using our existing, some select data centers within DoD, namely ones that are large. There's a couple of service ones that we intend to use, and then there's some of the DISA larger decks that we intend to use. And we're trying to get that started this year, and we have a plan in place to execute that. But we're trying to get to a point where we find a more affordable way to bring on mission partners to interoperate with us in these warfighting scenarios, because we can't put them on our SIPRNet. We can't put them on an IPRNet. So what we have to do, we have to put something in place where they can operate in secure mode, and then have this sort of fundamental network that can allow us to facilitate the type of military operation we're going about. But there's a big difference between what we can do in the base post camp station infrastructure and what we can do at the tactical edge in terms of cloud and virtualization, because there's always this need at the tactical edge to operate when there's a disconnect. And so you got to have some thick client capability right there with you to do business. And a lot of our systems, almost everything deployed is satellite based. And so we're sometimes we're going through a soda straw to try to make connectivity. And sometimes if you're in a large base forward, you got a lot more bandwidth. But by and large, they're always restricted. And so what we do on the base post camp station side is one story, and then what we do at the tactical edge is a completely different problem. So we have to try to work both of them and not get too carried away.
The level of complexity is probably hard for most people to understand because, again, post camp station, it's what we all expect every single day. But when you're in Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever, it's, as you said, the soda straw is a great analogy. Prince, you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I mean, cloud is not really a rip and replace conversation. I mean, it's more a business conversation as to what is the need to go to cloud, right? Why do you need to go to cloud? How does it make sense? I love these articles that make it seem like you just flip a switch and next thing you know, you're up and about in the cloud. In the real world, now you're kind of in the PC age where end users or your customers are used to having everything right there, and it's very fast. So if you don't replicate that experience, now you're going to end up dealing with the end user dissatisfaction. Hey, it used to take me 20 minutes, now I'm trying to save. So now not only you're dealing with the local area bandwidth, now you're also dealing with the wide area bandwidth, right, which can be a very expensive proposition. So all of those things have to be considered while making that decision. Or if you make the decision to go, you'll quickly find out that if you haven't planned for it, you haven't planned for that, even the money aspect of it, you'll find yourself spending a lot more money. And we have seen various projects within the government where, some of these things were afterthoughts.
And I know, Dave, you want to jump in, but we're going to take a quick break. And then we'll come back and continue this conversation. You're listening to the panel discussion, Pillars of Modernization in Government, sponsored by Insight Public Sector on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.